I'm Native America Calling host Sean Spruce. Federal support for public media programs has been eliminated, including our show, but your gift can help keep us going strong. Go to the donate link at nativeamericacalling.com to make a gift today. Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. A new report looks at the pervasive lack of housing on tribal land in Montana. A three-part series by the Montana Free Press finds hurdles that prevent would-be homeowners from finding space on nearly all of the state's reservations. It's part of a persistent problem across Native nations, but tribal housing advocates are finding ways to turn around the trend. We'll hear more after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. A resource guide to help small and medium-sized governments in the Great Lakes region adapt to climate change has been published. Chuck Quirmbach reports that some tribal communities in the area are already trying to reduce problems caused by higher temperatures and additional flooding.
The guide is from the International Joint Commission, or IJC, which helps implement the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909 between the U.S. and Canada. Liz Kirkwood of the IJC's Water Quality Board says climate change has brought more severe storms, loss of ice cover, and extreme temperatures to much of North America, including the Great Lakes region.
In 2024, extreme weather disasters cost the 8 Great Lakes states more than $13 billion combined. Some of the costliest disasters happened in the last 5 years.
While debate continues over how to reduce air pollution that contributes to climate change, the IJC has published a guide aimed at helping small and medium-sized governments adapt to the new temperatures and heavier rainfalls. Charlie Rasmussen of the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission says his organization welcomes the sharing of best practices, funding ideas, and other strategies. He says the Commission's 11 Ojibwe member tribes in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota are already taking steps, sometimes in collaboration with local, state, or federal agencies. One project being Ishkade. That's using prescribed or controlled fires on land next to water.
They help maintain and reestablish native species that do the best job at holding the soil and able to resist, some of these severe precipitation events.
Rasmussen says other tribes are putting in larger roadside culverts to reduce highway damage from flooding and to help wildlife move. He says tribes also share TEK, or traditional ecological knowledge.
It encourages building relationships with plants, animals, and water as living beings rather than just a natural resource that you manage.
The International Joint Commission says it recognizes its climate adaptation guide has some gaps, including needing more content from First Nations and island communities. For National Native News, I'm Chuck Quirmbach.
Family, friends, and colleagues from across Indian country gathered Friday and Saturday on the Oneida Nation in Wisconsin for funeral services to honor Ernie Stevens Jr., chairman of the Indian Gaming Association. Stevens is being remembered as a longtime advocate for Indian country and for making strides in Indian gaming. During visitation on Friday streamed online, his son Brandon Stevens said he was an amazing tribal leader who fought for Native voices, sovereignty, and future generations. And above all else, he said he was a family man.
To his family, he was more than a leader. He was a man who loved us without hesitation, who protected us, and who always reminded us that family is everything. No matter what we did in our lives, good, bad, or ugly, he looked straight through us and said, "You are my children, and I love you."
Stevens died suddenly at age 66 on September 26th. U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski says temporary federal funding for 14 tribal broadcasting stations in Alaska from the Bureau of Indian Affairs will help keep the lights on, but says the job is not done. In a recent statement, Murkowski said the funding will help some of the state's most rural radio stations make ends meet for now, but it's one-time funding. $10 million in BIA existing funding will support Native serving stations in the U.S. This follows the rescission by Congress of $1.1 billion for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. October 1st marked the first day public media operated without federal funding. I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Kawanak Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by Drummond Woodsum, a full-service law firm whose nationally recognized tribal nations practice provides services to tribal nations and their enterprises and to companies that do business with tribes across the country. More at dwmlaw.com.
Support by AARP, whose Family Caregiver Resource Guide is available to caregivers by calling 877-333-5885 or at aarp.org/caregiver-resources.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Financing, complex land ownership, and a lack of infrastructure contribute to inequities facing people who want to live on tribal land in Montana. Those are among hurdles laid out in a three-part series for the Montana Free Press. We'll hear from the reporter who wrote about the persistent housing shortage on Montana's reservations today. We'll also hear from Native housing experts about the hurdles that contribute to the housing gap for Native Americans. And we'll also hear about some promising developments by tribes and housing advocates to improve those statistics. Of course, we also want to hear from you today, our listeners. Tell us, what does housing look like in your community? What is needed to improve home ownership on tribal lands? You can join this conversation with a comment or a question. Just call us at 1-800-996-2848, 1-800-996-2848. Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Rudy Soto. He is the executive director of the National American Indian Housing Council, and he is a citizen of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. Rudy, hello, and welcome back to NAC.
Hi there. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Joining us from the Flathead Reservation in Montana is Jody Cahoon Perez. She is the executive director of the Salish and Kootenai Housing Authority, and she's also a citizen of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. Jody, good morning and welcome back to you.
That's correct. Thank you for having me.
For sure. Joining us via Zoom from Missoula, Montana is Nora Mabee. She is an Indigenous Affairs reporter with Montana Free Press. Nora, hello and welcome to Native America Calling.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And our fourth guest joins us from Ukiah, California, Christine De Los Santos. She is the executive director of the Northern Circle Indian Housing Authority. Christine, good morning to you as well. Great to have you on the show.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Rudy, I want to go ahead and begin with you today. It's probably no secret to many of our Native American listeners that we have persistently low home ownership rates across the country. What do you see as the main hurdle to improving those numbers?
Well, of course, it's no secret about the chronic underfunding. There have been years of underinvestment. Thankfully, just a couple years ago, there was an increase in funding by Congress that was just to catch up with inflation, and that's actually been protected at this time. So, we could be in a worse situation. Thankfully, we're not. Infrastructure gaps, many projects are slowed by limited access to water, sewer, roads, utilities. Those are just difficult barriers to overcome when it comes to the groundwork that's necessary to get housing developed. The legal and bureaucratic barriers, trust land complexities, and lengthy federal processes. Obviously, you also have workforce and material shortages that are made worse by issues like tariffs and inflation. and then largely, access to capital. You know, in Indian country, they have to be very resourceful and need a lot of partners to help make sure that we can deliver housing that's safe, decent, culturally relevant, and those are the things that we work on addressing.
Rudy, in addition to some of these chronic underfunding issues that you mentioned, what is the federal government's overall role in housing on tribal lands?
Well, this is something that's interesting as a question because so many people think that, Indian housing funding is like a handout, but it's not. Our ancestors had the foresight to ensure that in their treaties and legal agreements that there was language that provided for the federal government to uphold its treaty and trust obligations over time to provide for housing, healthcare, and education, among other general protection clauses. And so this is why the federal government has been long in this arena of providing funding, while not enough. But that's why that the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act was passed in 1996. And that is the bedrock foundation for funding tribally designated housing entities, tribal housing authorities across the country. And that's what NIHC, the National American Indian Housing Council, represents and advocates on their behalf in Washington, D.C. to policymakers.
Rudy, obviously, as you know, as well as anyone, Indian country is very vast, very large, millions of acres of tribal lands across the country. Are there specific places, however, where we're seeing housing shortages worse than others?
I would say, it's always going to be more of a challenge in the most remote of communities, the most rural of places, where they have shorter seasons where building can occur. The problems are all worsened there. But I also want to make sure we're not forgetting about the places where there are breakthroughs and where there are solutions and sophisticated, innovative, self-determination oriented leaders coming to the table to figure out how to bring housing to bear for their community.
Well, what are some of those promising trends that you're seeing to address some of these disparities?
Well, it's utilizing programs like Section 184, and there's a new program that's actually just in the process of getting implemented that was passed just a handful of years ago, and it's called the Section 184 Skilled Workers Demonstration Program. And it makes it so that tribes and TDHEs are able to construct rental housing for law enforcement, healthcare, education, technical or other skilled workers that the tribe needs. So it could even be, language, our elders that are dedicated to preserving a tribe's language. So, that's an emerging trend. There are tribes that are starting to look to build housing where their people are. And while there are challenges on reservation, sometimes we're starting to see tribes that are saying, well, our tribal members are in the city, near, not far from the reservation, and they're able to utilize their NAHASDA funds, our federal funds, with other sources of funding to bring housing where their citizens are working, and to make sure that they're figuring out ways to meet people where they're at.
Let's talk more. You mentioned the cities, and an issue that we don't always talk about in Indian country is the fact that we do have a growing exodus of Native people leaving reservations, and by some accounts, 70% of Native people today live off reservation. I think some listeners might hear that and think, well, maybe we've reached a tipping point. Maybe we can't turn those numbers around. Maybe we should be focusing more on the housing needs of urban Native populations. Rudy, what's your response to that perspective?
I think it can be both. We need to make sure that we're doing everything, we're turning every stone to make sure we're building housing on tribal lands. And that's why the Native American home ownership coalitions are vital, the work that they're doing to bring together the whole ecosystem of partners, the non-tribal, the banks, the CDFIs. Native CDFIs are a critical part of the equation when it comes to being a solution. So I think you can do both, but I definitely think that, it is overdue for some of the, 70% of Native people live off reservation because of relocation programs that the federal government forced onto us. So I think it's a balance.
Okay. Rudy, what about renting? The U.S. Chamber of Commerce counts a shortage of 4.7 million homes in the United States. And then you have the National Low Income Housing Coalition finding a shortage of 7.1 million rental homes. And these are specifically for low income families. How do those numbers show up in tribal communities? Are they similar or are they different?
Yeah, I mean, there's because of the struggle for rental housing availability, you have the massive overcrowding. I mean, I think there's no more, population there's no population in the United States that compares when it comes to overcrowding because, in many instances, people say, well, we don't have a lot of people that are homeless on the streets. That's because we don't put our people on the streets. We make sure everybody is okay to the best of our ability. And so, there are a long waiting list. And these are some of the reasons why we're driven to get NAHASDA reauthorized, so that there are policy changes made so that there's different income levels and qualifications people are able to meet. You don't have to only be low income below a certain threshold, because sometimes that can make it to where people are ineligible. And so then they don't even want to get a job that pays more, because then they'll be priced out of being able to have a roof over their head. So there's a lot of challenges we're working really hard to address.
What about NAHASDA, Rudy? We've got about a minute before we have to take our first break. Can you give us any updates with regard to how NAHASDA is functioning, especially now with the new administration in Washington, D.C.?
Yes. Well, we're very eager and optimistic about the ability to get NAHASDA past this Congress. We're waiting on the leadership from the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. Senator Murkowski is the chair. She's going to be leading the charge along with Senator Brian Schatz from Hawaii to help get that bill introduced early in the new year. And we have leaders teed up in the House that are ready to stand by us and to help move this. And we believe this will get done this Congress.
All right, we have Rudy Soto kicking off our conversation here today on Native America Calling. Just gave us an update on NAHASDA, the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act, a program that was put in place to support and foster housing across Indian country. If you want to join this conversation, phone lines are open right now. 1-800-99-NATIVE. Give us a call, share your insights, share your perspectives. We want to hear from you right now. 1-800-99-NATIVE. The city of St. Paul, Minnesota is renaming a site that is sacred to Dakota people. It's part of a series of actions to adequately honor the place that had previously languished in a neighborhood setting. We'll learn about efforts by cities, nonprofits, and tribes to better preserve important sites and urban environments. That's on the next Native America Calling.
The annual 2025 Indian Nations Conservation Alliance National Conference happens October 14th in Las Vegas. This 3-day gathering of tribal leaders, professionals, youth, and community members unites voices and action around conservation, innovation, and indigenous stewardship of Indian lands and resources. The Indian National Finals Rodeo will be there too. Info and registration at inca-tcd.org. Inca supports this show.
We're glad you're with us today on Native America Calling, where we are looking at housing shortages in tribal communities and solutions to creating more housing. And of course, we want to hear from listeners as well. Have you seen an improvement in the number of housing units in your community? Or maybe you're a Native person who can't find housing. You cannot find housing on your tribal lands. What's going on? Tell us. Join us with a comment or question by calling 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Our next guest, Nora Mabee with the Montana Free Press, joins us now from Missoula, Montana. And Nora, I'm excited to talk about your three-part series for the Montana Free Press. It's titled The Shelter Gap, and it explores barriers to building, renting, and buying homes in tribal communities in the state of Montana. Can you start us off with an example from your reporting that exemplifies these widespread issues in Montana and other parts of Indian country as well?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So I spent the last year and a half almost reporting on housing in Indian country, and I talked to dozens of people who really struggled to get housing, like you said. One example, that really stands out to me is this woman, Jacqueline Martin. She grew up on the Fort Belknap Reservation in north central Montana. And she, left to pursue higher education and opportunity. She worked in the natural resources field at the federal level, and she really wanted to return to her community. And she even has a group chat with her former high school classmates who also left the reservation to work in things like real estate, healthcare, construction, these skills that are in high demand on the reservation. And they have this group chat about they would love to return home to serve their community and be connected to culture, but they just don't have access to housing. So Jacqueline lives in Boise, Idaho, and she just sort of tries to help her community from afar. And that's a story that I heard replicated from so many sources of people who left, wanted to come back, and just couldn't for lack of housing.
Nora, you also spoke to a variety of people from the community development financial institution industry, CDFIs, housing directors, other experts. What did they tell you about the chronic nature of the housing shortage problem for Native people there in the state?
Yeah, so I talked with dozens of experts, tribal housing leaders, and they basically said, the housing crisis in Indian country is characterized by a lack of housing stock and then a shortage of tribally managed rental units. And so the result of those two things is that there's widespread overcrowding and then subpar conditions in the housing that does exist. And one of, the consequences I talk about in my first story in the series is that, the housing crisis has these massive economic consequences in tribal communities. When you have a situation where skilled professionals, can't move home because there's a lack of housing, and then oftentimes, the majority of the housing that does exist on reservations is limited to, low-income housing, then, it's really hard for tribal communities to have a middle class. And experts told me that, having a middle class is vital for economic development and for producing opportunity and services. So what ends up happening a lot of times is even people who work on the reservation need to live outside of the community, and that's where they end up spending their paychecks as well. So it just has these really big economic ramifications as well.
Nora, what about construction costs? I know parts of Montana, like other parts of the United States, it's just really, really expensive to build right now. Lumber, materials, everything, those costs are sky high. Did you just uncover any issues with regards to affordability of just construction and building there on some of Montana's Native communities?
Yeah, that's something a lot of developers talk to me about. Construction costs have just been really high post-COVID, and then also with tariffs, that just hasn't been helping the situation. And something, as far as affordability when it comes to development, developers were really telling me that a big hurdle is the lack of infrastructure. So if a developer is developing in an urban area, they would likely hook up to the city utilities like water, electricity, sewer systems. But in Indian country, especially in Montana, where we have large land-based tribes that are fairly remote, there's just a huge lack of infrastructure. And so for developers, that would mean, if you want to build, there's a bunch of other hurdles, but then, if you would need to build your own water systems, power, roads, that could cost tens of millions of dollars. And that's just something that a lot of people don't have. And developers said that could be a big deal breaker for them.
All right. Thank you, Nora. Let's go to the phones now. We've got the first caller of the day on the line. This is Nikos, who is from the Flathead Reservation in Montana, but is listening online today on station KNBA up in Anchorage, Alaska. Good morning, Nikos. You are on the air.
Good morning. Hello to all my relations, and thank you for letting me have this opportunity. I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, with a lot of tribes in the north, and I'm Salish, Kootenai, and Pend Oreille, so I live on the Flathead Nation, and we'd have to listen to your show streaming because I don't know there's a broadcast on a reservation. Having said that, I'm keenly aware. I'm a sociologist. I study socioeconomic conditions, and I want to compliment all the guests that you have, the ones that are going to come on, for working on a very complicated matter. I just want to tell you about a couple insights I have from my life, from my micro scale, which I live in Polson, Montana, near Flathead Lake. There's a lot of homeless people, and it's different. It's different on the reservation. Many of our peoples that belong to our tribe have a homeless member or partially unhoused members of their family. And then we have many tribal peoples from many other places in Montana and the Northwest that live on the Flathead Nation. It's we're a wealthy tribe. It's a resource-rich place. Yet we have these persistent, homeless problems and economic problems. Some of them have to do with underdevelopment on the reservation. In particular, that we don't have that great of public transportation, although the tribe is providing a lot better opportunities, for people to get around. But the economy is different. It's slower for people who, are unhoused. And a couple of insights that I had, I just wanted to throw out there. In Alaska, or in Anchorage, Alaska, we, tribal organizations, nonprofits had Department of Health and Human Services SAMHSA grants that helped with people that were homeless, in the sense that, I believe there's a problem with water for people. There's a lot of people living in like blue tarp tents and older bumper pull trailers, and I think instead of trying to completely build a housing unit for people who have different kinds of economic problems,
okay,
I think we need to make facilities where they can, like gyms, where they can have showers, and I believe, buckets for washing laundry, or maybe water filters, or even just more potable water stations.
Okay. Those are some really interesting perceptions there, Nikos. Thanks for calling in. Showers, perhaps, gymnasiums, other places for people who can just, who might not have a home per se, but they could benefit from some of these other services. Nico from Salish and Kootenai Reservation. Let's go ahead and bring Jody Cahoon Perez into the conversation now, because she is the executive director of the Salish and Kootenai Housing Authority. And Jody, what we hear from Nikos on the line, do any of those ideas make sense, or any of the issues that he mentioned, do they resonate with you as well?
Yes. And I know Nikos. He had helped us with our housing needs assessment a few years back. And one thing that the tribe has been working on for the last several years is a warming center for our tribal members. And they provide showers and a warm meal. So it's currently closed. I think that it's a funding situation why it's closed right now, but they primarily have like 7 or 8 people who come in and utilize those services. But there's a lot of people who aren't utilizing those services for one reason or another. And I think that the problem is being addressed to the best of our abilities with the resources we have right now. But it would be helpful if there was access to continuum of care funding for our tribe. And we're trying to work with the state COC to incorporate some of the programs more readily available for our tribal members. So there's light at the end of the tunnel. We're just having to figure out how to get there.
Thanks for that response, Jody. Yeah. Well, tell us about some of the other challenges that you folks face there in Montana and other solutions or ideas that seem promising.
All right. Well, I can just validate what Rudy and what Nora have said, that everything, it's very complicated and it's interconnected. But right now I have a grant that is from the Indian Community Development Block Grant. It was a competitive grant, and it was to install infrastructure. And the land that we were going to use is adjacent to existing water and sewer. And so that can't be annexed in to their service area until a professional engineering report is done, and it will take time and it will cost money. And so we had to find a different piece of land to develop. So we presented a thing to the council. They didn't think it was safe enough, so they said, why don't you put it in here? So we were going to put it in there. It was near existing utilities, because if it's not already in place, it's, like Nora said, it's too expensive to create new systems. And so then we found out through the NEPA environmental assessment that the land was purchased through BPA mitigation funds, and so it's set aside for wildlife and fisheries. And so now we're trying to do this land swap, and BPA is involved, and it's getting messier. And that's what I find with every single project I do. It just gets messier. So that's the hurdle, is for the infrastructure, right? You have to have land to put in the infrastructure, and then you have to have mortgage options. And there's very few options. Some reservations have 0 options. My tribe has 2. We have the HUD Section 184, and we also have a tribal credit department that does mortgage lending, but they are tapped out on their capital, so it's a very slow stream there. And then, like someone had mentioned, you have to have people who can actually afford a mortgage. And so you have to have workforce that can adequately afford mortgages. And then we do our first-time homebuyer education class here. I went through that class myself, and it helped prepare me for homeownership. And then I was able to get a 184 loan. So anyway, it's all complicated, and they are endless hurdles, but there is some success. Last year, we were able to construct 9 homes for homeownership on our reservation, and it was on land held in trust. And so those were our low-income tenants that were financially secure, and we subsidized their mortgages so that they were affordable. So we had stick-built homes that they are now in their forever home. So that was success, and now we're trying to do it the second time, and now we're having a problem with the land issue. But we will work through it. We just have to keep throwing darts and then changing when they don't stick.
Jody, what about rental units? I go to many different Native communities, and I see more and more of a need and a request from tribal members who don't want to be homeowners. They would rather rent. Do you do you face that issue as well there, Salish Kootenai?
Yes, we have a lot of people who are they're not ready for homeownership, right? And so, and like me, in my teens, when my parents divorced, I moved in with my dad, and we lived in a low-income HUD-assisted rental. So it serves its purpose. Almost everyone who works at housing has, one time or another, went through our program. And so our inventory is 530 low-rent units, but we have 275 low-income eligible families on our waiting list. Over the last 3 years, we have added 34 to our unit count, and that brought us to 530. We have funding for at least 10 more units that we're going to be building next year. but I am dependent on federal grants for all of the projects that I'm doing. The money that is necessary to do all of these projects just isn't here. There's no other option. And so I'm very grateful that Congress is recognizing their treaty obligation and providing opportunities for me to help my people progress.
Jody, we have a couple of minutes before we have to take our next break, and I'm interested in learning more about these buildings, the homes, the rental units you describe. I think a lot of folks might listen to the show and have visions of some of the older HUD homes or the old 37 Act tribal homes. What do these new modern tribal housing solutions look like? What type of square footage are we talking about? What types of floor plans? What types of building materials?
Okay, so for one of our first construction projects, we had a trailer home site, so it had different vacant lots that were being not utilized. So we put 1-bedroom units in there so that it would fall within the footprint because it already had the land and the infrastructure was in place. So all we had to do was the construction. We used our Indian Community Development Block Grant, and also, so in short, we call ICDBG. There was an ICDBG ARP that we also received from the American Rescue Plan. So we were able to build 13 1-bedroom homes on these vacant units. They are 800 square feet, and they are decent. They are not fancy. They are not luxury, but they have rubber trim around them. You know, they are going to last a long time, and they were stick built, so their life should be at least 50 years, and we'll get more than that because we maintain our units very well. So they were designed by an architect and engineering firm out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and they meet all of our standards. So it's they have electricity, and there's no propane. We don't have access to that kind of stuff very well here. So anyway, 800 square feet. We have 2 bedrooms that are 1,200 square feet. Okay. And then our 3-bedroom and 4 bedrooms that we're building, those are about 1,400 square feet, and they stay within that same footprint.
All right. Thank you so much, Jody Cahoon Perez from Salish and Kootenai Housing Authority. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Support provided by Amerind. Amerind is 100% tribally owned and partners with tribes and their businesses to provide affordable commercial insurance coverage, protect tribal sovereignty, and strengthen Native American communities by helping to keep dollars in Indian country. Information about property, liability, commercial auto, and workers' comp available at Amerind.com. That's AMERIND.com.
You are listening to Native America Calling. Still plenty of time if you would like to comment or ask a question about housing in tribal communities. Maybe you are a Native American person who describes yourself as being middle class and you're having a hard time finding housing on your tribal lands. Give us a call. Tell us what that's like. 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. We have a fourth guest on the show today, Christine De Los Santos. She's the executive director of the Northern Circle Indian Housing Authority. But before I bring Christine into our conversation, I want to go back to Nora Mabee with Montana Free Press. And Nora, one of your features, you wrote about the president of Blackfeet Community College up there in Browning, Montana, needing to find a house, and it was quite a journey, quite an ordeal. Tell us more about what it does to a community when people who are brought in to educate its citizens have difficulty finding housing.
Yeah, sure. So I, in my third story in the series, followed Brad Hall, who's the president of Blackfeet Community College. And he, left the reservation for a period of time to pursue other opportunities. But when he accepted a job as president, he, really struggled to find housing. He rented in a community that's near Glacier National Park and is just really expensive from tourism. And that wasn't sustainable for him. And he was also living far from campus, which made it more difficult for him to serve his students and faculty. But eventually he approached a Native Community Development Financial Institution on the reservation, a Native CDFI called NACDC. And Native CDFIs are really something experts told me could function as a solution to this crisis, because unlike banks, they operate as nonprofits and are able to use creative financing mechanisms to help people get the capital they need to buy homes. And so Brad worked with NACDC and he was able to get a loan. The challenge for him was actually finding a home for sale on the reservation. Some studies have shown that, the Blackfeet Reservation has a functionally zero homeowner vacancy rate, meaning there's just not a lot of homes for sale. But he learned of one through word of mouth, which he said he was really lucky to find out about. And he was able to close on it in 2024. And it's a 2-bedroom house. It's 5 minutes from campus. And, in conversation with him, he said being able to own a home in the community that he serves allows him to better serve his entire community and to really participate. And experts I talked to said, that can happen at scale. If more people are able to access safe, secure housing, entire communities will really benefit.
All right. Thank you so much, Nora. Let's bring Christine De Los Santos into our conversation now. She's in Ukiah, California, Executive Director of the Northern Circle Indian Housing Authority. And Christine, I've got some questions for you. But first off, I just want to give you a chance. You've been waiting in the wings now for more than 30 minutes. Do you have any initial comments or thoughts with regard to our conversation today?
Definitely, these are great conversations that we are having. The lack of homes available throughout Indian country is definitely, it's a big problem. But yeah, definitely these are great conversations that we're having.
Okay. Thank you so much. Now, your housing authority, you recently completed a project for the Hopland Band of Pomo Indians, houseless tribal members. This program is designed to serve. Tell us more about the need it fills.
Yeah, so the Hopland Fourplex, it actually started back in 2016. And originally it was funded by the Home Investment Partnership. And this is a federal grant through the state of California. It originally started at $920,000. And Northern Circle Indian Housing Authority was the first tribal entity awarded in the state of California. And this project targets chronically homeless citizens within the Hopland tribe.
$920,000. What all can you accomplish with that much?
Oh, well, at that time, 2016, that was enough money to build a fourplex. But during, 2014 was when we started the construction. From 2016 to 2024, there's a lot of challenges that came up. California, everybody knows we were devastated by natural disasters, mainly fires. And then not only with the fires, we had to deal, we lost a lot of homes, but then the pandemic happened. So just those two situations right there created an increase on costs for everything. We just completed the project. So originally starting at that $920,000, it took, we're a little bit shy of $3 million to get this project completed. So
Now
obviously we had to bring in more partners and more funding sources to get it completed.
And that fourplex that you were able to build, does that make a pretty significant dent in the number of houseless tribal citizens that you serve, or do you still have a strong need for more of these types of buildings?
It helped 4 families. And on this current waiting list, there's a little bit over 200 members that are in need of homes. So it definitely, it's great that we have 4 new units, but we definitely need more.
Christine, what's interesting is your program, you work with 8 different tribes in the region. I imagine you have to balance a lot of priorities, different interests. What does it take to serve the needs of 8 different tribal communities with their housing?
Well, it's actually 9 federally recognized tribes that we serve.
So each tribe does have a different need. And we're pretty spread out. Some of the tribes, it'll take me 3 hours driving time to get out on site. Another tribe, it's 2 hours. Another tribe, it's a little bit over an hour. And then we have a few tribes, 20, 15 minutes, and then we can be on site. It does take a lot. What it actually takes is a team that's fully invested in our mission here at Northern Circle to make sure that these activities get completed.
Christine, the government shutdown that started last week, is that impacting your work at all?
Well, you know what? It's scary. It's scary for the citizens because we provide a lot of different programs, subsidies for rental assistance, mortgage assistance, help with the utilities. We help a lot of elders with different needs. And so when the government shut down, of course, it created a panic upon the citizens. But every day we show up and we reassure the memberships that we are here every day. We will have our doors open. We will continue to do the work for all of the tribes that we serve.
Okay. Jody Cahoon-Perez, I want to ask you the same question with regard to the impact of the federal shutdown, because I don't think we've talked about yet on this show is some of the other federal processes that go into place with Indian housing. You've got title status reports, environmental reviews. Some of these documents need to be approved by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Are you running into challenges yet?
Not yet for my specific situation, but for Belknap, who is also in Montana, they are impacted on a lot larger scale. So their staff, they are having staggered schedules because of this shutdown. My tribe is an investment tribe, so every year when we get our annual allocation, we draw down all of it, and then we invest it in safe investment portfolios. And so we have our funds already accessible in cash, but they do not. And so they had to shut down partway. And so it is scary. I have never had more faith in our congressional leadership. So the delegates that serve Montana have been good to tribal housing. And so I feel that as long as we can get this NAHASA reauthorization through Congress, then it will have more security and we'll have better footing moving forward.
Jody, do you mention any impact of shifting political trends on tribal housing?
So the bottom line is that we need congressional support that's bipartisan. It's a trust responsibility, and I think it would do justice if we had a whole hour on the impacts of settlement on tribal tribal land and the creation of reservations and all of the congressional acts that had happened in our past that bring us to where we are today. But the bottom line is that as tribal people, we are mostly on our homelands and we want to stay on our homelands. We are forced to operate in the dominant society that is in direct conflict with our value systems and our way of life. And so it takes time for us to assimilate, so to speak, into the dominant society and buying into how the dominant society operates with stationary homes and having a 9-to-4 job. All of these things are contrary to our natural way of life. And so it just takes time to get there, but our congressional leaders have been supporting us for the last couple of years. We had stagnant funding from 96 until 2 years ago, and then they did right by us, and they gave us a 30% increase in our annual funding, and that was to bring our spending power back to the same baseline that we started, because we didn't have inflationary factors built in. So they did it right, and okay. We got that bump, and so it's been 2 years in a row that we received that higher allocation, and that allows us to address our housing needs in the way that makes the most sense for each individual tribe. So it's promoting sovereignty and also their treaty obligations.
All right. Thank you, Jody. And I think another takeaway from our show today is maybe we need to be doing more of these housing shows to stay up to date with the fast-paced world of tribal housing and some of these developments. So, and we still have time to take another caller. If anybody would like to join the conversation, 1-800-996-2848. If you're fast with your phone, we can get you in right now before we have to wrap up. And Christine, I want to go back to you because we've heard a variety of challenges here: lack of infrastructure, funding, bureaucracy, red tape. What do you see as the main obstacles to financing and various infrastructure issues, specifically there with the tribes you represent in California?
You know what? A big problem is getting everybody on the same page, because it takes more than one person. And then, having the housing authority involved, and then having the tribes involved, and then just having those good partnerships in Washington, so that if we work all together, we could get so much more done.
What would you like to see? I mean, you mentioned that fourplex sounds like such an exciting project, $920,000. What could you do with 10 times that amount of money? How could you put that money to work, and what would you focus on specifically?
You know what? We would definitely work on more housing, definitely. And then just because there's a shortage, in the whole state of California, and it's so expensive out here. Like I said, it went from that $920,000 to a $3 million project, just for 4 units. And we're not talking anything fancy. And it's beautiful though. I actually spent some time down there at the Hopland Rancheria on Saturday, and it was just so nice to see the families, like they're finally safe. They finally have a permanent place where their families at, and they have a safe place to sleep at night, and they have a place to cook their meals and be together. That is just the biggest thing. If we had more money, we definitely would build more.
Christine, I have seen statistics that children who grow up in homes that their parents own, they do better in school. They're more likely to go to college. They have less behavioral issues. Do you notice any of those impacts with the community members, the families, the individuals, the people you serve?
Well, definitely with the homeless population. It's a little bit tricky when you don't know where you're going to sleep tonight, or you're concentrating on just basic needs of like, when's my next meal going to be here? Or, what am I going to eat? Or what am I going to have water to drink today? When we're concentrating on those things, like how can you see past tomorrow? So when we create those stable environments, of course, like great things are going to happen when you have, that stable home. So that's what we need to focus on, definitely.
Thank you, Christine. And Nora, maybe I want to go back to you, give you the final word of the show. Your 3-part series, The Shelter Gap. Do you have plans for a follow-up, or what's next with your reporting?
Yeah, I definitely have plans for follow-ups. There were so many things I couldn't fit in the series, and some people talked to me about, there's just not a lot of domestic violence shelters on reservations, and some of that has to do with the same housing challenges. So I want to look into that. Michigan has a really interesting program where the state helps fund projects on reservations, housing development projects, and works really well with tribal housing authorities. So I wanted to learn more about that and see if that could be replicated. And then, of course, something that came up a bunch in this conversation is NAHASDA. It hasn't been reauthorized since 2008. That was the last time Congress reauthorized it, and it expired in 2013. So I'm definitely going to be following, if this Congress passes that legislation, which will be really huge for housing development.
We have now reached the end of our hour. We're going to have to wrap up the show. But first, I would like to thank all of our guests who joined us today: Rudy Soto, Christine De Los Santos, Nora Mabee, and Jody Cahoon Perez. And please, listeners, don't forget to join us again tomorrow when we will look at the work to protect sacred sites in urban areas. I'm Sean Spruce. You've been listening to the one, the only Native America Calling.
Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885 or online at aarp.org/caregiverresources. AARP supports this show.
Skugtash oigamo uchuchuga ko toipia kutoaki. Owuminyo kokojamaki makai kosmaimo asmasma uchuchuga kuipi mumkita. Cancer, Chastio Osapu Muhuja, Ambite Smaki Monuik Healthcare.gov/coverage. Omohaguga the Kumako Gigi, Sikort, Y Kumako Gigi, Gog Hutas Humuk Ju, Ida Amjet Himaka Medicare, Medicaid, Hachipka.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico, by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.